Hey, and welcome to Industry Night with me, Nycci Nellis, the show that takes you on the deep dive into the happenings of the hospitality industry. Now, sometimes there's a focus on culture, and sometimes there's a focus on travel trends, and sometimes there's a focus on passion projects. But it all comes back to the industry. Now, for those of you who are new here, welcome, and a little bit of background on me. So for the last 20 years, I've been covering the DC food, wine, and hospitality scene via a variety of outlets. You've seen me on TV, you hear me on radio, my podcasts, and of course, where it all begins, thelistareyouonit.com, the online e-zine that tells you about everything happening in the DC metro area. And then when it comes to radio, you may hear me on WTOP, but you definitely tune in every Sunday at 11 to my husband and I doing Foodie and the Beast on 1500. We've been doing it now for 14 years, and it is always a bacchanal. And you follow me at NYCCI, NELLIS on Instagram, Facebook, and for the moment, Twitter. But that's where I am, unlike my guest who is on later today, who is not on any social media, which we will get into later. So I want to welcome you all back with me and Happy New Year. So I'm at the Wine Lair here in DC, the private wine club. Normally I'm in their private room, which is lovely and warm and beautiful. But today I'm in the actual cellar, which is also lovely, but it's a cellar. So it's not so warm, but we're going to power through. I'm very excited about it. If you're looking around me, you see all these fabulous wine lockers. So members here at the Wine Lair get to keep their wines here in their lockers. And there's a whole history to it. We'll bring John Kieran back in at some point and he can tell us all about it. So I'm back from a few weeks of holiday insanity. And I have to be honest, it was so nice not to be on all the time and to be able to walk a lot, which I love doing. Even though if you remember, it was frigid out, but your girl here likes to walk between 5 and 6 miles every day, and I bundled up and I did it because I eat and drink for a living, so got to stay active to balance everything out. So let's talk about where I've been, because the last 2 weeks I have been out and about. Christmas Day, we used to do Chinese in a movie as Jewish people, real Jewish, not Jewish, people do. But this year we hit Kevin Tien and Susanna Bay at Moon Rabbit and did Vietnamese and ate an incredible feast. If you have not had Susanna Bay's pastries, you are really missing some excellent desserts here in the city. And of course, Kevin Tien rocks out a crispy, crunchy, amazing fried chicken, unlike any here. I also actually had a party here at the Wine Lair. They do private events. So if you're looking for a really cool, cozy, interesting and unique place to host an event, Kathy Hollinger, the former head of RAMW, and I invited a bunch of boss babes here to toast the coming holiday. And it was really quite the affair. Bar Sparrow has opened. That's Johnny Sparrow. It's open now at the Capitol Commons, right around the corner from L'Ardente, and I hit both because that's how I roll. Bar Sparrow is supposed to be Basque cuisine. Some of the dishes are really good. Get the steak tartare. It's fabulous. The rest I feel like needs a little tune-up. And L'Ardente is killing it. It doesn't matter what day of the week you're there or what time you're there. The place is packed. David Deshays, amazing Italian food, amazing vibe. If you haven't been, good luck getting a reservation. Caruso's, more Italian, but casual Italian, has now opened up at Pike and Rose. Matt Adler and the team at Neighborhood Restaurant Group are knocking it out of the park there. I've been twice already and cannot wait to go back. Who does not love a red sauce Italian restaurant? New in Georgetown is Mike Graffiti's Yellow, which I've also been to multiple times. Yellow started off of Albee in the Navy Yard. This is an actual cafe. So he has all the amazing pastries, but also real lunch, breakfast foods. My favorite right now is the za'atar encrusted croissant stuffed with lebna. It is an absolute dream. Also, if you don't know that Dauphine's serves lunch, it's one of the latest things that they are doing there, and the lunch is pretty amazing. So Kyle Bailey and the team really put out a beautiful lunch that you could either stuff yourself silly with, or have like a ladies who lunch kind of experience. You guess which one I did. All right. So now everything you just heard about, you can be found on thelistareyouwanted.com. Obviously, if you follow me at NYCCINELLIS on social media, you can see pics of all of it. And also, if you want to stay up to date on like Dry January, Veganuary, all the ways you're going to be eating in and around the DC metro area, Restaurant Week, etc., head to thelistareyouwanted.com. Okay. It was a lot. On to today's show. So, one of the biggest names in restaurant and retail real estate in the DC metro area, and probably nationally, but I know him locally, is John Asadoorian. John is of Asadoorian Retail Solutions, and he has so much experience, 40 years of experience developing really how you eat and shop in the DC market. He is an expert. And the reason why I brought him in today on this show is because everything we talk about in restaurant and hospitality, the one thing that I feel like people don't dive into is real estate, which you can't open up a restaurant unless you have a place. I mean, you could do it in your house, but that's not going to work very long. So I invited John in today to sort of get down to the nitty gritty of what it takes to really be in retail or restaurants, not just in the city here, but in the suburbs and across the country. So, hey, John.
Hey, how are you?
Great. Thanks for coming to me today.
Psyched to be here. Thanks.
So let's give people a little background. It's not like every little boy sits in his bedroom and says, when I grow up, I want to be a real estate magnate. So how did it happen?
Yeah, that definitely wasn't my dream.
Okay.
I'd be too embarrassed to tell you what I wanted to do when I was little. But, one day the light turned on in my head and I realized that, DC was a city that I loved as a native and a Washingtonian, but it was lacking a certain vibe and certain soul. Mm-hmm. And growing up in DC in the city in the 60s, yep, I'm ripe old age of 60.
Okay.
I just remember as a family, we'd go downtown. The lights were bright. The shops were big. The restaurants were special. And fast forward to being an adult in my 20s and realizing that we had lost some of that as the city started growing outward towards the suburbs and the core of downtown sort of lost a little bit of that luster. And
so is this the 70s or the 80s?
This is the 80s.
Okay.
So right out of college. So I developed a passion for bringing retail and restaurants back downtown. Mm-hmm. And I was given the opportunity with a large developer, the Oliver Carr Company at the time, to handle the leasing of their buildings. And I approached it with the idea of what could be. And I would walk the streets of New York. I went to Syracuse, so I was familiar with New York City. I'd walk the streets of New York and I'd say,
it's not like Syracuse is like near New York City, but go ahead, I'm with you.
Exactly. But I'd be like, why isn't this restaurant in DC, or why isn't this retailer in DC? And I just pick up the phone and call. And my first responses were, we already have a store in DC, or people in DC already shop our store. And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, well, they hop on a plane, they fly to New York. And I'm like, so I wanted to bring a little bit of that vibe to DC, and I would cold call big names just to see if I could get them to come to DC. And fast forward 40 years later, I built a business on trying to create the city that I wanted to live in, basically as an enlightened consumer that could pick up the phone and call somebody and sell them on an idea.
Well, that is an amazing path to follow, but it doesn't really get to the heart of how DC went from really more of a small town feel in the 80s. If you were to ask people what the neighborhoods were in DC in the mid 80s, they say DuPont, Adams Morgan, Capitol Hill, Georgetown.
And that was it.
Am I missing anything?
No.
So how do we go from this sort of small town vibe? And I have to say this because people always make the wrong assumption. Just because DC was small did not mean we didn't have good things. We just didn't have the breadth and depth of things because we also didn't have the space and the people who wanted those things.
Well, we went from being a government town because the business of Washington was government. It wasn't
you
flashy.
should tell the New York Times that we are no longer a government
town.
We
aren't. We have been found out not to be a government town, but the business of DC wasn't flashy like entertainment, or wasn't financially glitzy like New York City glitz. So there's a misnomer that the people in Washington didn't have taste, where we have taste, we have culture, we have affluence, but we don't have places. We didn't have places to express our are enlightened consumer dollars.
Mhm.
So slowly, surely, as DC grew in the 80s and the 90s, our economy was always strong. Downtown was getting reinvented when office started coming back into the East End, sort of
Like
between
Penn Quarter?
like Penn Quarter,
Mhm.
and that created real estate opportunities where someone like myself, with a restaurateur in tow, would sell an idea that, hey, you should be in the nation's capital, because it's ringed by affluent suburbs, and people come into downtown to eat, and we have tourists, and look at this beautiful building, and look at the law firms moving back into town.
Mhm.
So then you would have people from outside of DC for the first time in many years looking to come to Washington, chefs that are household names today. Bobby Flay. There was a period of time when I was walking the streets with Bobby Flay before
He was Bobby Flay.
before he was Bobby Flay.
Arizona
And
206.
Arizona 206,
Yeah.
and Sierra Machione with Le Cirque. And
Mhm.
these were all just smile and dial, and hey, you should be in DC.
But was that before? So there was sort of like maybe in the aughts, there was a moment where a lot of people in a lot of cities, so like the Bobby Flays or even the Michelle Richards, Charlie Trotters, like people, restaurateurs who were sort of in their city, stayed within their city, all of a sudden expanded greatly.
Yeah.
Right? Like sort of pre the 2008.
Yeah.
The recession.
Yeah.
So was that, do you think how you saw things and what you wanted here, do you think that did it create a frenzy?
I wouldn't say it created a frenzy, but it created opportunity because there was a confluence of logic and luck. Okay,
Mhm.
I would consider myself more lucky than anything because I had an idea and I pursued it, but I was lucky that the timing was right.
Mhm.
I say lucky now because I look back on it and I go, wow, this really was cool how it happened.
Right.
But the bottom line was that I think on a national level, the restaurant hospitality industry saw a path for growth because in the past, a chef had a restaurant or a group of people had a restaurant. And that was it. It was
Right.
one chef, one restaurant. They were in the,
Not everybody was a Wolfgang Puck.
right, but there was a fine line between being a chef and an artist, if you will, and being a business and growing a brand.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start growing nationally, you can't be in 5 different places at once when you're supposed to be in the kitchen.
Right.
So you start to become more of a brand, like let's say a Wolfgang Puck.
Mm-hmm.
So we sort of hit that timing with the availability of real estate in Washington. So we were a table that was set, if you will, waiting for someone to put the food on it. And these chefs came from other markets as they're looking at other cities and saw DC as wide open because we had a lot of great chefs here, but we're still a small market.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know the exact number of which city has the most creative chefs that create the most restaurants.
No, but at the time, I think there was not the breadth and depth of space, and there wasn't the people. I mean, the explosion of people in the DC metro area between 20 years ago and now, I mean, it's astronomical.
Yeah.
And then the building that happened along with it.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing. In the past, there's a core population that stayed here. If you're from DC, you stayed here.
Right.
But a lot of people would come to go to school here.
Right.
Or they come here with the administration, and then they leave. They graduate from college, they go back to
But they
San
didn't.
Francisco. They stayed,
Right.
exactly. And that's when the urbanization of DC, sort of the people coming back into the city,
Mhm.
can sort of joined with this activity of chefs and restaurateurs that can expand. So now we had a resident population that was young and eyes open, stomachs open, and it sort of met and created this urban trend that saw an explosion of restaurants.
And I think the culture of dining out changed. So people wanted to put their dollars. Eating was entertainment, right?
Exactly. Americans as consumers, we entertain ourselves by spending money.
Yes.
Okay. So
I'm very good at it.
Yes, I am too. That's why I'm a retail broker. And you while away the time at the mall or fill in a blank shopping.
Mhm.
Well, at some point, dining out became retailing.
Right.
So in today's world, I'm a retail broker, but I do a lot of restaurant deals. People say, "Oh, you're a restaurant broker."
Right.
I am, but I'm a little bit of everything. But the predominance of work has been restaurants, food. You look around, there's a lot of food because that's how we entertain ourselves.
Right. But I have so many things I want to talk about. So I want to go back a little bit and then I'll get to my other one. Because I want to talk about sort of if you have a restaurant, and you want people to schmai around, they can't just schmai at restaurants. There has to be other retail or other things to engage them. So we're going to put a pin in that because I don't want to forget it.
Okay.
But let's go back to you bringing outside restaurants here. Like, were you involved with Il Molino?
I was not involved with Il Molino.
Okay, good. Then I can't blame you for it. But so to me, when outsiders started coming to DC, I think some of them were sold this like, come to DC, people spend money, you don't have to change who you are or what you do. And then the Il Molinos, the Elaine Ducasses of this world came to town and be like, and you're welcome.
Right.
And DC said, you can go screw yourself.
Right.
So the question is how do you sell to these outside concepts and say to them, listen, when you come to DC, you're going to have to make it for DC, like Wolfgang Puck and the Source, like Steven Starr and Le Diplomat.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you and I know Le Diplomat is Park, but he made it Le Diplomat for DC. And I mean, it's one of the best grossing restaurants in the city. So, what's your pitch? How do you sell in the ever-changing market?
It's not so much a pitch as it is a regulator, because to a certain extent, people's motivation for coming to DC, it could be a variety of things. Someone like Steven Starr is motivated by the actual character and the essence of the space and whatnot. Other people might be motivated by the deal. If someone says, hey, I'm building a new office building or I'm building a new residential building and I want your restaurant in my building, I'm going to buy you. I'm going to pay you to come here. That's a kind of deal that is risky because they're not in it the same way somebody who's gone all in emotionally.
Right.
And the most successful restaurateurs, in my opinion, are committed emotionally, not just financially. If you're opening a restaurant because someone gave you a lot of money to open a restaurant, you're going to make a mistake. You're going to open in a location that people aren't going to. You're going to open in a space that isn't entertaining and doesn't have character. And Washingtonians, as much as we have so much mileage to go on how our palates will expand as consumers, because we don't have many places to exercise that. So every time someplace new opens up, you as a consumer, your palate expands. You find something different. Sure. But if a restaurant opens and just placates everybody doing the same old, Washington's not going to last.
Right.
So it's a really tough place for people to do business.
Well, I think like a Momofuku, for example.
Perfect example.
Can maybe open, I don't know if they're in Dallas or Texas somewhere, but they can open in other markets and be successful where I know when they opened here, the initial reaction was, we're going to support our locals. Katz's place is around the corner. Right. Like, we're going to go do that.
And it's not the Momofuku that I know when I'm in New York.
Right.
So the risk that the outsider takes in coming here is you could potentially make that mistake.
Right.
I counsel the people I work with all the time. I ask them questions. I'm like, don't do what you did in the other city just because it was successful. Give us our own and you will succeed. Because to a certain extent, most people that walk in the door won't know this is a Steven Starr restaurant or a David Chang restaurant.
Right.
They may come in.
They're not reading the dailies like we do.
Right.
Yes.
So without disparaging anybody or questioning their motivation, if you come into town with that kind of an attitude, you take a bigger risk that you won't get under the skin of the consumer and become that place.
Right.
Whereas if you're a local and your passion's in it, like some of the chefs we've mentioned, the restaurants are timeless. Sometimes maybe the food might not be perfect. Those tourists might be slower, this and that. But you as a consumer don't notice that. You're there for the whole experience and it's authentic versus someone that came in with a big name and maybe an out-of-town management group and the food was great and whatnot, but something was missing.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I think of listen, when Daniel Boulud came to town for DBGB in the city center, they really tried to do everything to make themselves a part of the community. They did the whole event with the chefs. They really went all out. But at the end of the day, there was a disconnect. And even though it held on for longer than I thought it would, it never hit it right.
Yeah. Now that you say that, if I think about it, for every big name chef that came into the city, there really aren't any big name chefs that have restaurants in the city that are still open.
Wolfgang Puck.
Well, yes, there are a few.
Yes.
Michael Mina and
Michael Mina at Bourbon Steak.
But for the most part, the most successful time in, time out are the local chefs.
Yes.
Whether they were just started business last week or they've got 7 restaurants. They're resident. They're part of the community, and I think that comes through in the flavor of the food, if you will.
But do you also think? Listen, with the major change in real estate in DC, as well as our access to different restaurants, this happens to be an incredibly educated diner in this community. I guess you can say that in most major cities, but this city is not if somebody comes in, like, when Bad Saint first opened, it's not like people are impressed. We're like, yeah, of course we have that kind of food, or Tammy Dip or Mies, or you know what I mean? Like, we're like, yeah, because we're an international city, so of course we're going to have cuisines from everywhere.
Yeah.
So the question is how do you balance working with the local people and bringing in the big business? Because I assume the big business has more money.
Not necessarily. There's a lot of perceptions, and that's a very good question you ask. And sometimes when I'm asked questions like that, the answer is very simple. I myself, through my eyes and my efforts, do not see that. I look at totally as the essence of the fingerprints of the person I'm dealing with. What do they bring to the table? Whether it's Steven Starr or it's a startup chef that just left a big restaurant. To me, in my eyes, they're equal. It's a matter of what are you putting on a plate? What are you bringing into the restaurant as experience, as soul, as character? You mentioned Kevin Tien. You mentioned Bad Saint. These are restaurateurs and chefs that they haven't been around as long. Nationally, nobody knows who they are. But you can go in and have just as good an experience there as you could at La Diplomat or any other restaurant in town. So to me, it's not about size mattering or any of that mattering. It's the ultimate experience. So I always say the fingerprints. So to me, the driver is, what's your passion? Why are you doing it? What's the food you're putting? And then in my mind, I'll be like, there's this location in the Navy Yard, or there's this location in Reston, or there's this location in Ashburn, or there's this location in Bethesda. And I sort of marry the potential of the location, the market, the neighborhood with the chops of the operator. So sometimes the big guys don't get the fact that there are opportunities in the suburbs because they're only looking at the big flashy things like the Wharf. Whereas the suburbs are huge opportunities. There's a ton of people
so much money
with chain restaurants, right? The money's burning a hole in their pockets. So I'm on an education sort of process of showing people opportunity. I always ask people when I'm working with them, what do you want to be when you grow up? Everybody wants to make money, but you can only make money so long because at some point, if you're not putting something out consistent, you're at risk.
Well, but I will add to that. I think it's really interesting. Some of the people that we both know who have opened in the suburbs don't really understand the suburb market. So if you think of, let's use Bethesda, okay? Very, very wealthy area, Montgomery County. It's one of the wealthiest counties in the country. But if you open up a restaurant, we both know this because we've seen it happen. If you open up a restaurant with DC prices, these people with all their money are going to be like, I can go to DC for that. I don't come here on a Tuesday with my kids after karate to pay $400 for dinner. So understanding how people are going to eat in your restaurant in the suburbs, I think, is really important.
Yeah, well, especially post-COVID. Because one of the things that shifted is the foundation of where people go, why they go. And earlier you were talking about, well, if you got restaurants, what do you do to pass the time in between? And it's all very valid. Why is someone going out to eat? Is it a special occasion? Are you going out for a birthday for someone special, or is it just three people going out to eat?
I mean, Americans are where we really differ in the eating world. Is that if you lived in Europe, people are not going out to dinner or to lunch the way Americans eat out. We are. I mean, I'm a cook. I cook, whenever I'm not out, but. People order in or go out and spend their money on food in an incredible percentage difference to what's happening in Europe. It's too expensive in Europe to go out. They don't go out for dinner. They're certainly not ordering in. It's a very different culture.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about spending $400, per person, let's say for dinner, I live in Great Falls, Virginia. If I'm going to go out to eat, I'd rather, if I'm going to spend that kind of money, I'm having a good time. I'm with friends, and I'm in a space that's a little bit different than the restaurant around the corner from my house.
Right.
So for that reason, it might be hard to say that's going to exist in a Bethesda or whatnot. However, as nobody has an answer to this just yet. As they're working from home more, as they're not spending as much time downtown, as the patterns of traffic and parking and all these other issues swirl around. Is there an opportunity for a higher price point experience in the suburbs or not when there wasn't? I don't know, but today still, going to the Wharf and sitting there and watching the sunset while you're eating at Del Mar, that's part of that experience. But, spending $400 to eat on a side street in Bethesda isn't the same kind of experience. Right. So it depends on what you're looking for. And I don't think the die is cast yet on if that'll change that way. But I think at the end of the day, people are just looking for really great food, executed consistently, great service, great value, great experience. And I think that the suburbs could exist just as easily as it could downtown. The Diplomat was in Tyson's Corner. That sounds so chain generic-like. The Diplomat works on 14th Street because it was a building with character and a great neighborhood with character.
Everybody in the city looked at that building.
I used to say it's two buildings cobbled together. If the rest stopped holding hands, the buildings would fall down.
Sure.
And Stephen had a vision and he put it together for a location no one else saw. But if you had a Diplomat in Tyson's Corner on a beltway that pulls from 25 miles, imagine how much more money that restaurant would do because of the character. But the operator himself sees value in the bones of a building like that on 14th Street than a brand new office building in Tyson's Corner.
Right.
But the market for consumers is huge out there because some of those people don't drive all the way downtown to wait for a restaurant they can't get into. So that's the dynamic that.
But I also think finding so there's a couple things with that. It's respecting the people who are out there and who your diner is. So if you will, a PR person was opening up a restaurant in Tyson's Corner, and she said to me, "I really got to get you in there." And I was like, "No, you don't."
Right.
I said, "I'm happy to go, and if you want to book them on my show or whatever, like those are things I'm totally cool to do. But you don't need me. You should not be looking from Tyson's into DC. You should be looking Tyson's out.
Yeah.
Because the people you want are the people in Leesburg, or the people who are going to come into Tyson's. They're not coming from DC.
Yeah.
So I think you have to really be smart when you're opening up in these other areas. Okay, wait, I'm going to go back now. So let's use the Wharf as our example.
Okay.
Restaurant. While you're working on these kinds of developments, as they are literally coming out of the ground, what is your process? How do you curate? How do you make sure what you're bringing in? I know you have a vision. I know there are things you want. But how do you go about to make it something that people will enjoy, which would therefore make it successful?
Yeah. Well, if you look at what's happened in the DC area, at least in the 40 years that I've been in the business and the 60 years that I've been walking this earth as a native, a lot of neighborhoods have lost their character from a retail perspective. They're the same stores you see every 5 miles, the same coffee shops, the same this, the same that. So when you have a piece of real estate like the Wharf or some of these other neighborhoods, Union Market or the Yards, where there's so much interesting character, you sort of do a disservice to not think out loud as to, well, we could just put, fill in the blank, this chain restaurant because they were willing to pay the highest rent versus this operator that has a story to tell. I always look at businesses as what's their story? Who's the owner? Why are they doing this? And could that add value to this piece of real estate? The Wharf is one of the most visible locations in the entire metropolitan area. If you drive over the 14th Street Bridge, you're there.
Right.
So the biggest disservice to do is to put, the gap there.
Right.
Okay, you can buy the gap anywhere. But maybe you do something like Todd Thrasher opening a rum distillery.
Right.
Before the Wharf opened, Todd Thrasher did not know how to distill rum. I talked to Todd Thrasher about doing a possible bar.
Well, so for those who don't know, Todd, who now does Thrasher's Rum, but Todd was the original bartender with PX. It was the first speakeasy in the DC metro area with Cahal Armstrong and his wife, Michelle, ex-wife, Michelle. It was called PX, and it was over in Alexandria.
Yeah.
So he was one of a couple of bartenders in the area that sort of ushered in the cocktail explosion in this city.
Yeah, and I like how you said bartender because he's not a mixologist.
No.
He's a bartender.
Are you kidding? I've been educated on that.
Exactly. And to me, that's the essence of creating a place, let's say a piece of real estate like the Wharf. We could have gone and done leases with brands, big names that wouldn't be in the kitchen. And that would be, in my opinion, a sellout because as a local, as a consumer, I don't need to go someplace just because of the brand. I want an experience.
Right. As
a tourist, you do the tourist a disservice. As a business traveler, whoever the consumer is going there, don't just placate them with what you think is going to work because this guy paid the highest rent. Put something that's authentic, a story, so that when you go to the Wharf and you see this rum distillery that in big letters says make rum, not war.
Right.
How ostentatious is that in a city like Washington? And there's a guy named Todd Thrasher who's a bartender. That's the essence of authenticity. And I could go through that example with many fine establishments in the city, but that's what I wanted to do at the Wharf. And to the extent that I had the privilege and honor and was invited to add my input onto who to put where, that's what we tried to do. We try to curate, I hate that word, but try to put together.
But it is fitting in this. It is overused. I appreciate that. But years ago, like, I'll use Rockville Pike as an example. Nobody was curating anything. It's just bang, 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 bang. It's ugly. Nobody wants to walk it. Nothing about it is attractive. There's no thought process. Obviously, it feels that way. But, when you go to the Wharf, or when you go to the Navy Yard, or even when you walk around Shaw, or 14th Street, you really do get a sense that somebody is thinking about the aesthetics, about what the person is going through. Except, although I will tell you, at the Wharf, clearly a man decided on the cobblestones, because those things are going to hurt a girl. I mean, seriously, you cannot walk in heels on
the women
those.
in my life,
Have they told you?
Oh yeah, they're like, here's a comment card that you should pass on. But
it's Monty Hoffman, right?
Hoffman Madison.
I told him.
I
was like, the cobblestones, dude. Seriously.
Well, you can't win for trying, because one of the beautiful things about someplace like the Wharf, in my opinion, was everything about it was authentic. So there wasn't stamped concrete pavers. There was cobblestone.
Right.
I remember seeing these masons sitting there on their knees, chipping the stones, putting them in. But to your point, I think that curating, placemaking, merchandising, it's not that hard if you are aware of the options, and then you sit down and you pursue them. You talk to a Cahal Armstrong, you talk to a Fabio Trabucchi, you talk to a Todd Thrasher, and you say, here's an opportunity. It may not be what you were thinking, because you weren't thinking about the waterfront. You were thinking about Georgetown or DuPont Circle or whatnot. But look at it for what it could be. And Todd's a good example. He didn't know how to make rum. He signed a lease. He went to Moonshine University in West Virginia, learned how to distill rum. I remember seeing videos on his Instagram of a still in his backyard. And now you go and it's a legit place. So that was the whole strategy behind that. And frankly, everywhere else, when we did leasing at the Yards, when Michael Babin opened up Blue Jacket, that was a passion of his with Greg Engler.
And
Greg Engler.
Engler. No, I was thinking of, I remember when Michael White opened up Asadoorian Marine.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And I remember being like, I didn't even know it was called Navy Yard then.
Right.
And I was like, what is Michael White doing opening? Like,
exactly.
14th Street was just starting to pop. And I was like, is there something going on in the Navy Yard I didn't know about? And there was.
My favorite saying, and I can't say it out loud, but I'll just use the word. I was like, I want to go somewhere and overhear somebody go, how the F did that happen?
Right.
Michael Marini at the Yards, and this is before there was anything else
there. I said it.
Yeah,
I was like,
exactly.
and I did know how it happened.
Yeah.
But I was like, I wonder if that was good advice.
Yeah.
And then, when Union Market, when it was first coming out, and the whole thing about the market and building it as this amenity to show people, if you build it, they will come. And one of the things that I always tell people, because I did some work with Jody, not in your capacity, obviously, was that they had a plan. They told everybody they could about it, but they also did incredible programming from day one. They had events there, and they did festivals there. They brought people in from all over, so that going down to that area was not odd.
They walked the talk, and that's a lot of times part of the challenge with retail real estate at scale. The motivation of the ownership of the project or their abilities. Same with opening a restaurant. The motivation, the ownership, their abilities. But if you have a certain vision, it's frankly quite simple. The overused term, keep it simple, stupid.
Right.
If you believe in this and you do the right thing with the right people, the success will come. If you try to manufacture the success, again, you're at risk that the wheels fall off because it wasn't authentic.
Right.
There's no place more authentic, as much as it might feel contrived today because it's been so successful, as Union Market. I mean, if you told me as a Washingtonian that you would see the kind of vibrant activity there, I'd say you're crazy. I'm afraid of getting, mugged down there, 20 years ago. But now, when Nick Stefanelli opened Masseria, for what that experience was.
People did get mugged, by the way, when they used to walk from Union Market to Masseria when it first opened. It was still, still a little, but.
Hey, that's urban living. You get mugged in New York.
Listen, you can get mugged. I can get mugged in front of my house. I live in suburbia. Anything is possible. But there was a commitment. And Jody said to me, Jody, what's the other guy's?
Steve Boyle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Steve. He said, we want this to be the meatpacking district of DC.
Yeah.
And I was there a couple of weeks ago. I mean, I'm there often, but
Yeah.
I was really walking around because now the other side
Yeah.
of Florida, whatever that street is, all the
New York Avenue.
Yeah, New York.
Florida Avenue. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, but Florida Avenue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm walking around and I'm like, they did it.
Yeah.
I mean, they really,
Yeah.
they had a vision
Yeah.
and they really stuck to it.
Yeah, we're fortunate in the region that we have the kind of business leaders and the public process that gets it and does the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings up a question about some of the smaller local businesses too. It is unfortunate when you see the change and some big things come in. So back to your point about how to curate or merchandise, I always try to weave in something that is local because change is going to happen no matter what. But how can you preserve that? How can you maybe work with someone that's small business, local, that has a future and has a business plan?
Mm-hmm.
And that's another way that you sort of infuse that into the merchandising. And Eden's did that very well in the market with a lot of small businesses they have in there.
Well, they really gave a platform, much like you gave to Todd. They really gave a platform to the Amanda McClements of this world.
Absolutely.
They did that with a lot of people, Gina Trosofani.
Oh yeah, for sure.
People who, even the Rappahannock guys.
Oh yeah,
that was their first.
That was their first
standalone.
They're a distributor of
oysters.
Yeah,
So Mike, I guess the question is though, as DC becomes bigger, as we have all these fabulous neighborhoods, yes, there are tons of new buildings. Everybody wants a splashy restaurant because alcohol sales make money. How do we afford the by square foot? Like, I'm going to go back to Johnny Spiro for a sec. So I went to Bar Spiro. It's a really large space. It's a very specific concept. He's an amazing cook.
Absolutely.
He loves his tweezers. They are effective. But I don't know if that concept can feed 120 people on repeat 7 days a week. And I mean, my heart kind of struggles when I walk into a space like that and I don't know. I mean, Johnny's other restaurant is for like 40 people. I mean, it's a big difference.
Yeah. I use the word regulator in the past, and as much as I'm a deal maker and I go out there and I promote business and whatnot, the people that I have the opportunity to sit in front of, whatever side of the table I'm on, I try to be a little bit of a regulator too, because it's easy to get carried away. Now, after COVID and whatever state the economy is in now, it's harder to do business. The cost of everything is increased, but there are people out there still looking to expand, and you need to advise these people. They need to be aware that this may sound great right now. This is all beautiful and shiny and whatnot, but it's very risky territory right now. And I will tell you that as one that's sort of been part of the table setting process, I myself don't have answers. And I advise people to ask more questions because right now in the next 12 months, between the over 10 new restaurants at the Wharf,
right,
there's at least 4 new restaurants in Union Market, Stephen Starr, Keith McNally.
Georgetown is also exploding.
So let's just round it up and say in the next 12 months, there's going to be 25 new restaurants opening in DC.
Restaurants of note.
Restaurants of note, exactly.
Not even like the piddly restaurants, but the restaurants of note.
Now let's talk about the suburbs. Just in Tyson's Corner, there's at least 5 new restaurants opening. The Saltline guys opening on Mateo and Pepe Mocoyo, in Reston, in Bethesda. So now let's say within the region, there's probably at least 30 to 35 restaurants. Now, you and I as consumers, if we're finite, we have a height limit in DC, how many of these places are we going to go to? And we may go originally because of the honeymoon and they open up great. But to your point about a restaurant of size like that, it's.
Well, the question is first of all, yes, how many are we going? You and I are different. We're going to all of them.
Yeah.
But how many are we going back to?
Right.
And but the other questions is do we have the ability, the staffing, to fill those restaurants with people who could do service? Now, like when I went to Yellow the other day, I was like, where do you get all this staff? Like that place was packed with people. And I was like, that's amazing. But I mean, my phone blows up regularly. Like, who do you know? What do you know? Like, I need people. So we were already in a staffing shortage pre-pandemic. So now that we're here now, I know these big restaurants are opening. And well, actually, that brings up another question. With all these new buildings, there's so much construction. I mean, when you're driving into DC, it's crane, which is very exciting. But it feels like most of these restaurant or retail spaces are so large.
Mhm.
And you need big shoes to fill those large spaces.
Mhm.
Is
Mhm.
there a way to communicate to the builders, like, hey, maybe let's open smaller spaces?
Going forward, you won't see that as much.
Okay.
A lot of things that you see today probably started construction 2+ years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So times are different, and they've changed so quickly right now.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those spaces might not get occupied.
Okay.
And I think that there will be some corrections. And labor was a problem beforehand. It's going to be a problem going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be survival of the fittest. Because consumer, that's one thing about us. You and I may go out a lot and whatnot. We're loyal, but we have options.
Mm-hmm.
So loyalty doesn't factor into the question as much as it used to. There's that favorite restaurant you would go to every Friday night.
Mm-hmm.
Now you got 3 to pick from.
Right.
You know, so it's going to change, and I mean things will work out, but it's not as easy as people think
Mm-hmm.
because people are already starting to look at other options as far as whether it's downtown versus forget Tyson's and Reston, Ashburn.
Right.
Forget Bethesda. It's further up 270
Right.
in Potomac or Gaithersburg.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess the question is, with that, is it also because the real estate is cheaper?
Well,
You know, like when there was the mass exodus of great chefs in New York and they all went to Brooklyn and
Yeah.
Hoboken.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't feel like that's what we're seeing, because I can't imagine Germantown being some sort of
But I'm
culinary hub.
I'm
But go ahead.
I'm going to flip it on its head right now.
Okay,
It
go
is
ahead.
the other way around, because right now the prices in the city have fallen
Oh.
rent-wise versus the suburbs.
Really?
Yeah, because post-COVID, the whole question about the work week.
Mm.
You know, if you were an attorney that lived in Montgomery County but worked downtown, and now you're working downtown 3 days a week
Right.
or 2 days a week, and you got used to for a year and a half or 2 years working out of your home or your office in
Mhm.
wherever, in Tyson's or whatnot, now all of a sudden your patterns have
It's a shift.
changed, right? And so maybe you're going downtown less often, but for a more specific reason.
Mm-hmm.
So, and with abundance of space downtown, the prices have shifted, so the rents are a little bit lower. Or let's put it this way: there's places where there's negotiability in rents when there weren't before.
Okay.
Now in the suburbs, where the traffic is consistent, whether it's
Mhm.
highway or density of office buildings or people that live there, this conversation earlier when you talked about how do you get people to come into the city, much less to lease space in the suburbs, is starting to click. So people are starting to say, well, you know, the cost of doing business in the city is high and the traffic's not there and there's much more competition and labor's an issue.
Mm.
But if I go out to the suburbs, near metro, labor is easier to get to. There's less competition. The rents are a little bit cheaper.
Mm.
Well, now the rents are going up.
Right.
But at the end of the day, rents are a function of sales. So most spaces are priced based on what the landlord thinks the tenant is going to do in sales, because there's a formula of how much they can afford.
Sure.
Where it gets a little bit high is when an owner of a property hears that the space across the street went for a certain amount of rent, they're going to want that or more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that disconnect sometimes occurs. So I think the cost of real estate is an issue, but it's not so much downtown versus suburbs anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I just walk into a space and I'm not great at math, but I start doing the math in my head and I'm like, I know I'm not great at math, but this is not.
Yeah.
It doesn't add up.
Yeah.
You know, you see like 3 chefs in the kitchen or 2 somms or something. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's not going to work.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I appreciate where the thought is.
Yeah.
DC is an amazing dining town. There are great places to eat, and it's an amazing cultural hub. But there's not a ton of places where people are going to go like Le Bernardin, go for 4-hour lunches.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like that's just not our culture.
Yeah.
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 Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Quickly before we wrap
Yeah.
up, what are you? Not off the record because this is on the record, but what are you looking forward to? You mentioned 30 restaurants. What are you excited about with 2023,
Man,
or maybe into 2024 because you know how it goes?
Yeah, man. I'm really excited to see Minetta Tavern open in Union Market. Keith McNally, I got to know him, and
he's a character.
I mean, if you think his Instagram posts or something, I mean, he's a gem of a man. And so it'll be interesting to see Stephen's new restaurants. From Georgetown with Nancy Silverton to Pastis and L&O that he's going to open in Union Market.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Raffiti with what he's got on the books. There's some really great restaurants that are going to open. the long shot hospitality guys with Amateo and Tyson's, the Tex-Mex restaurant of the kind we haven't seen. I think that's going to be phenomenal. All of the new restaurants opening at the Wharf, Lamani, Greek restaurant on the waterfront, Philly Chow out of New York, be a white tablecloth Chinese restaurant. I don't know if you remember Mr. K's.
Yes, of course.
I'd say sort of on the lines of that.
Right.
I think there's some really great things coming along that will keep our palates sort of,
Well, plus there's so many new real estate places. Like I think of where La Dente is, or I think about where Shoto is. There's all these little pockets now of multiple concepts. Like where, I don't know what the area is called, where Dauphins is and Shoto, but it's
Midtown,
yeah, Midtown, right? There's that
Grazianona.
And then there's the chicken place.
Yeah.
Like there's so much in there.
Yeah.
It's you're sort of like, how did this all come to be?
Yeah.
It's very cool.
Yeah. Well, that and the Wharf's done, but the waterfront. So I think you've got to look to Capitol Riverfront and now Buzzard Point.
Because it's all going to connect.
It's the whole of the donut, and they're great neighborhoods with character. They're buildings with character, and if you put restaurants in there with character and vibe, it creates that sort of that energy. And so,
if I can add, the walkability.
Oh, absolutely.
So to be able to walk from the Navy Yard around Buzzards Point, and then to walk as a walker, and to walk the Wharf, that to me, like I can't believe we squandered so much time to not give DC that view.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And when you add in the entertainment components of it, whether it's the anthem or even a stage, a soccer game, a baseball game, you can have dinner at the Wharf and walk to a soccer game. It'll take you forever in an Uber or a car because it's a parking lot, Right. But just that vibe, it didn't exist in the city for a long time. Georgetown waterfront, people would always say, gosh, it'd be great if I could just walk more than the distance of Washington Harbor.
Right.
But
and not get hit by a plane.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, John, you're not on any social media. I don't know what's wrong with you. So tell us where we can find you if people want to open up here in DC.
Yeah, the only social media I have is on Instagram. It's Retail Ninja, at Retail Ninja.
Okay.
I was once labeled that by a client.
Okay.
But that or asaretail.com, asaretail.com.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure. I'm psyched.
Chat with you forever.
Yeah, I love it.
And I want to thank you for joining me today. So a couple of reminders, so much is happening in the DC metro area. I mean, you just heard snippets about it, but check out the listareyounit.com, the online e-zine that tells you about everything happening. The calendar is chock full. Restaurant Week is coming, and promotions galore are happening. Restaurants are ready to serve you, and are a bunch of bars. Check out the openings too. A lot of the places John and I talked about, they're all in there, so you can stay up to date on where to eat and spend your dollars. And follow me at NYCCI, NELLIS, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for the moment, on all my dining and travel adventures. Lastly, a little note. We talked about staffing shortages. It's still a real thing. And I just want to remind everybody, especially with Restaurant Week coming up, to please take your kindness pills when you dine out. No restaurant wants you to have a bad experience. It doesn't make them money. So just remember to take a deep breath, maybe take a pill, be calm, order a glass of wine, and just have a good time. That is the point of dining out. So thanks for joining me today. Mary Beth Albright joins me next week. We're talking about her new book. It's going to be delicious. This is Nycci Nellis with Industry Night. Have a delicious week.
Produced by Heartcast Media.